Hi friends, let's talk about how to lower and reverse high cholesterol without drugs. Number one is to block your body from reabsorbing saturated fats and cholesterol. And there are many ways to achieve this. First, you can simply change the order that you eat food and front load foods with lots of hydration, fiber, and low calories first. And this is why people start their dinner with salads. However, if your salad is drowning in fatty and sugary salad dressing, then that is no longer a low calorie food. Now, simply by having your favorite salad dressing on the side and just dipping your fork in the dressing will significantly reduce your intake and still enable you to enjoy your salad dressing on that salad. And this will make it an effective cholesterol lowering salad, especially if the salad volume matches the volume of your caloric foods. You can't expect a leaf of lettuce to make up for 5 cups of steak. If you're eating 3 meals a day and only eating salad for one of those meals, then the other meals won't be covered. But you can counter this with eating other vegetables or eating fruits. Now, I know a lot of people eat fruit for breakfast, but they often save fruit for the end of the meal. And just by switching the order and eating the fruits first in the beginning of the meal, that will help you lower your cholesterol, as the fresh fruits are full of water, fiber, and they're also low in calories, despite the fact that they taste sweet. And that's why number 2, eat lots of whole fruit, especially apples. Apples are so convenient as a quick snack. I probably eat at least 4 apples a day because I just love the crunch. Today, I found organic Fuji apples for 99 cents a pound at my local supermarket. Now, if you don't eat them, you may want to consider adding at least an apple a day because they have been shown to reduce cholesterol and various gastrointestinal cancers and heart disease. Even just 2 dried apple rings a day can lower your LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, help you lose weight, and reduce a lectin made by your body in response to inflammation called C-reactive protein, or CRP. Now, when I crunch into an apple, I imagine unleashing the power of water, fiber, and 2 powerful antioxidants called quercetin and vitamin C, which synergistically, they all help me achieve good blood pressure, good cholesterol, and good blood sugar levels. Apples are one of my all-time favorite fruits to eat. And after I bought those apples, I tried one of them, and then I couldn't help but eat 2 more. However, I avoid apple chips as they are full of sugar and refined oils. And dried apple rings, they're really a little bit too rubbery for my taste. Now, apple juice and apple cider, it doesn't have the fiber and it is full of sugar. However, if you have someone who can't eat fruit for some reason, maybe bad teeth, maybe swallowing texture issues, then they can actually drink orange juice to lower cholesterol, which is number 3. But when you can, always stick to whole fruit and whole oranges because whole fruits have soluble fiber that forms a gel matrix in your small intestine to capture cholesterol and saturated fats from your food, as well as bile, which is made for cholesterol. Now, preventing your body from absorbing saturated fat and cholesterol will decrease your overall total body cholesterol levels. Have you been told you have gallstones? That's made of undissolved cholesterol. And the higher your cholesterol, the higher your risk of making more gallstones. Kind of like human pearls, but removing them is much more difficult than extracting pearls from an oyster. This is why we should all make sure the cholesterol that is secreted in the bile doesn't get recycled back into our blood. Bile is a liquid your liver makes to help digest fatty foods. And your liver cells are constantly making bile, which is a mixture of many different ingredients, including cholesterol and the breakdown products of red blood cells called bilirubin. That's why things that damage your liver can leak bilirubin into your blood. That's not normal. And here's a list of some causes of high bilirubin. Don't ignore this and make sure you are seeing a medical doctor if your bilirubin is high. Now, if your doctor is stumped, go see a gastroenterologist or a hepatologist who are experts at liver metabolism. Normally, fresh bile is funneled into a storage sac called the gallbladder, which releases bile in response to fatty foods in your small intestine. Now, if you've ever had Shigella food poisoning, you may have noticed that your diarrhea is a shade of green. That's bile. Shigella is a bacteria that is a leading cause of deadly food poisoning around the world. And in the United States, 450,000 cases occur annually. Shigella is resistant to stomach acid and multiplies in your small intestine and then invades your colon, producing toxins that inhibit the absorption of nutrients and fluid. That's not the preferred way to reduce cholesterol. Transmission is from ingestion of contaminated food or fingers So you should always wash your hands before you eat and avoid touching high contact surface areas like faucet handles and doorknobs, and protect your food from pesky houseflies. Now, you may think food poisoning is transient, but 600,000 people die around the world from Shigella, and amongst the survivors, 3% suffer long-term autoimmune issues known as reactive arthritis. They have symptoms of chronic joint pain and swelling. That would be 5,640,000 people, because 188 million people worldwide get Shigella every year. You should see a medical doctor if you think you have Shigella. Now, why am I talking about your gut bacteria when this video is about blood cholesterol? Because your gut bacteria helps to determine how high your blood cholesterol is and how well your gut microbiome and your health will recover from food poisoning. On social media, people love to debate about anti-cholesterol pharmaceuticals and foods, but they ignore our number one metabolic machine, the gut microbiome. Bacteria are amazing creatures and can digest any material with carbon in it. That's why bacteria can clean up oil spills in the ocean. However, the wrong bacteria can make you sick and prevent you from recovering. People underestimate the odds of getting food poisoning. Even here in America, 1 in 6 people get food poisoning every year, and you will likely get several bouts in your lifetime. And every time, this will change your gut microbiome and your metabolism. Some of you may be taking a medication called ezetimibe that inhibits cholesterol from being absorbed in the small intestine. Well, if you already have bacteria that can digest your intestinal cholesterol, then you have the benefits of medication without the side effects of medication. People who have microbes with the gene intestinal steroid metabolism A, or SMA, simply have lower blood cholesterol because this gene transforms cholesterol into coprostanol, which is poorly absorbed. Eubacterium copranten oleaginase is a bacteria in hogs, but humans don't carry this strain. However, there's roughly 40 trillion bacteria in your gut, most of which are very difficult to culture. But if you take care of your best friends, then they'll take care of you. And how do you do that? By eating enough fiber. Multiple clinical studies have shown that fiber is essential for healthy cholesterol levels and to cultivate healthy gut microbes. This is common sense, as cultures who live the longest on earth eat a ton of fiber-rich foods, which lowers cholesterol and feeds a diversity of beneficial microbes. And these cultures have never read a single randomized controlled trial. Now, it's ironic. While long-lived cultures are simply eating and enjoying their long, healthy, and happy lives, people in the West debate about the health risks of high cholesterol, and we spend billions of dollars shortening our lives eating highly processed foods with an abundance of added sugar and saturated fat. Then we spend billions of taxpayer money trying to prove fiber-rich whole foods are healthy, and even more money subsidizing the agriculture industry that is mass-producing the wrong plants and animals. Did I mention the trillions on medical care? Now, how does this make any financial sense? It doesn't to me. I can't make policy, but I can vote with my wallet every time I shop. So I choose a shop with local farmers, and I boycott highly refined processed foods. And this is why I buy number 4, broccoli, from my local farmer weekly. Now, broccoli doesn't just have fiber to lower your cholesterol, but it also has phytonutrients called glucoraphanin that reduces LDL cholesterol levels through the induction of an antioxidant called NRF2. Your body is resilient and can make shock absorbers to protect you from the damage caused by the stressors of life. But the thing is, you have to activate these shock absorbers. Remember those James Bond movies? How every time Bond gets in a jam, he has to press some button to activate some tool to save his life? Well, one of those shock absorbers is called NRF2, or nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2. This is an enzyme that helps transcribe messenger RNAs to make proteins. And when NRF2 is activated, it appears to help prevent fatty liver, obesity, and diabetes. Now, broccoli is probably the most popular cruciferous vegetable in America, yet we don't eat enough of this powerful vegetable with immune activators. Your foods, they're constantly modifying your genes, and all foods ultimately genetically modifies your genes, whether you know it or not. This is called epigenetics, where your environment is interacting with your gene expression. And I purposely eat or avoid foods to have control over some of my epigenetics. Doesn't this add another meaning to being genetically modified? Now, in my previous videos, I have mentioned the word sulforaphanes, and these phytonutrients have cancer chemoprotective properties and are found exclusively in the cruciferous vegetable family, which is food number 5. So if you aren't a fan of broccoli, then eat red cabbage. But sulforaphane are actually made from glucoraphanins in the presence of an enzyme called myrosinase, which is released when you chop your cabbage. And this is because myrosinase in cabbage is locked up in separate compartments. And that's why I recommend chopping your cruciferous vegetables and then letting them sit for 30 minutes before you cook them or eat them to let that myrosinase turn your glucoraphanins into active sulforaphanes. This is actually true with all cruciferous vegetables. Do you see how you're actually getting teeny tiny doses of nature's drugs that interacts with your body to change your gene expression? And it does this in multiple ways to get you healthy. And it doesn't just focus on fixing one simple number like cholesterol. Now, just to be clear, I am not against medication as they are life-saving, and I prescribe life-saving medications all the time to those in need. And one day you will probably need life-saving medications too. You may be in that stage of life, so you should really have a heart-to-heart with your personal doctor before you change any of your medications. Now, we've only talked about vegetables and fruits, and frankly, you won't be a healthy or happy person if that's all you ate. The most nutritious part of any plant is the seed, as they literally can grow into another plant. The seed is like the egg that will blossom into a full adult plant. Grains, beans, peas, legumes, nuts, and kernels are really different types of nutritious seeds, and they are all important to eat because they all help you reduce your cholesterol, and they give you a variety of different nutrients to nourish your body as well as a healthy gut microbiome. Now let's take walnuts for example, which is number 6. Eating half a cup of walnuts daily have polyunsaturated fats that have been shown to lower LDL cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. Now every 40 seconds, someone in America is having a heart attack, and the average age of a heart attack for men is usually in their 60s. Sure, everyone's going to die, but do you really want to speed it up? The worst part about heart disease is that if you survive, your quality of life will be significantly reduced. And the best part about heart disease is that we can delay it for decades simply by choosing the right foods to eat and avoiding the wrong foods to eat, which is number 6, saturated fat. Now, people are still debating whether or not high cholesterol causes heart disease. And that debate is really in a small group of people, the carnivore and keto experts. And they believe that high blood sugar causes heart disease, and that having high cholesterol is perfectly fine if you have low triglycerides. And this is because your body needs cholesterol to synthesize hormones and cell membranes, which are the sacs that hold all your cells together. But on the other hand, the American Heart Association and every board-certified cardiologist wants you to have super low LDL cholesterol levels because they are associated with high risks of heart attacks. LDL cholesterol is a major contributing factor to heart disease, but they also don't want people to smoke or have high blood pressure or high blood sugar. Now, to understand where the truth lies, it's important to look at the big picture of human history, as oftentimes the view of experts is really tunnel vision. Now, many people think heart disease is a modern disease, but it's actually an ancient disease, existing more than 4,000 years ago. The earliest documented case of atherosclerosis or blocked vessels was in an Egyptian mummy princess estimated to be 30 years old who lived in 1580 BC. Imaging scans of mummies from 4 different areas on this earth, including ancient Egypt, ancient Peru, Southwest America, and ancient Unargan, which is known as Leucine Islands of the modern-day Alaska, show the presence of atherosclerosis or calcium plaques in 37% of 140 scanned mummies. Now, there were only 5 Unargan mummies frozen in time, and 3 of them had atherosclerosis. The Unargans ate lots of seafood, wild birds, and wild plants, and probably ate similar foods to the Inuits due to the harsh, cold environment. And the mummies with atherosclerosis died at the mean age of 43 years, and those without atherosclerosis died at 32 years. And this is because people didn't live long in ancient times due to infectious diseases. And this shows that as we age, all of us will get atherosclerosis. So if your goal is to live until 40, then the debate about cholesterol causing heart disease is irrelevant, since an infectious disease is probably going to be your biggest problem because it takes decades to take your heart out. But if you're like me and want to live healthy beyond 40, and that's what knowing what really causes heart disease is helpful. I'm sure you've heard about the coronary calcium scan. That's a CT scan that looks at calcified plaques. So it's going to miss non-calcified plaques. And mummies that got a good CT score didn't mean they didn't have atherosclerosis. They just didn't have calcified plaques. And we know that these plaques build up as young as age 11 with fatty streaks. And by 18 years old, they're definitely there, as evident by autopsies of young American Korean War veterans. Now, imaging scans can't predict heart attacks, and that's why I've never had a coronary calcium scan, nor does everybody need one. Here's a list of risk factors to get a poor CT calcium score. I don't have any of those risk factors. And notice how every risk factor is in your power to change, except for your family history. Now, the gold standard to look at the patency of your coronary arteries is really a cardiac angiogram, where they inject a special dye and through an x-ray machine, they watch your blood flow. With that information, cardiologists for decades placed stents to try to prevent heart attacks in critically blocked vessels. However, even angiograms, they can't predict when a blood vessel will stop flowing, as most heart attacks happen in blood vessels that aren't critically blocked. So the plaques in your arteries that kill are less than 50% blocked. And that's why interventions like coronary stents, they don't work as intended. To really prevent heart attacks, you need to remove risk factors. If you smoke, you got to stop smoking. If you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, you have to normalize those numbers. Now, we have a billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry to help people with getting their cholesterol, their blood pressure, diabetes, and weight normal. But as time goes on, many people will find that they will need more and more drugs. And this is because medications, they don't address the root cause. If it did, you wouldn't need to take medications for life. Now, the only way to get to the root cause is by changing your lifestyle, especially your diet. Now, you may be looking for symptoms of chest pain, but most warning symptoms of heart disease, they are not chest pain. You most likely will have symptoms of poor blood flow with some sort of infectious disease, indicating that your immune system is getting weaker. And when you need an antibiotic or meet someone with my skill set, then you should heed that warning sign. Those who favor eating a high animal protein diet believe ancient cultures ate predominantly meat and that they didn't get heart disease. Now, first of all, you are unlikely to get heart disease if you die before 40, and we have ancient data and modern data to support this. However, it takes decades to get heart disease no matter what you eat. Second, I've watched enough nature shows to know that even hunting carnivorous animals like lions aren't successful at hunting most of the time, and they don't live very long. And people are even slower, and they're even worse hunters than cheaters and lions until they invented the gun. None of us were around in ancient times, but anthropologists have studied human writings and human remains, and the evidence is very clear. The paleo diet was full of grains and plants. Animals were for kings, for pharaohs, and for emperors. I know that the average ancient Chinese peasant didn't eat much animal protein. In fact, the average person in Asia probably didn't eat much at all. The continent of Asia has more malnourished people than Africa. Now, mass graves of Roman gladiators confirmed the grain-rich vegetarian diet by analyzing their bone structure. And in fact, they were named barley men, eating lots of wheat and barley. In general, Romans were really active people. The amount of energy used for a typical Roman army trooper was incredible, about 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day, like a modern-day professional athlete. Their diet was 78% carbohydrates. Now, the only ancient culture forced to eat animals are those who lived in harsh environments like Alaska that didn't grow plants. But autopsy and CT scans confirm that those cultures who ate a meat-centered diet not only had atherosclerosis, but they also had severe osteoporosis due to their high-protein diet causing metabolic acidosis and calcium loss from their bones. Now, we blame our modern factory processed foods as a cause for atherosclerosis and heart disease, which is true, but highly processed foods did not exist in ancient cultures, and yet they still had atherosclerosis. Ancient Egypt ate mostly plants. However, the upper society, like the pharaohs who got mummified, they enjoyed animals and game meat. Peasants were not mummified. Now, if you lived in ancient times, you were unlikely to survive beyond 40 years of age because of infectious diseases. Now, CT scan and angiograms are very static tests. They can't predict which vessels will be blocked under stress. And that's why there are cardiac stress tests or functional tests that put your heart under stress through exercise or a chemical to see if there's any blockage. Today, many people know that the classic symptoms of a heart attack is crushing chest pain that radiates down the left arm. But the connection between symptoms and heart disease wasn't connected until the 1950s. But these symptoms have been written in medical documents as far back as 3000 BC. Now, it took the heart attack of President Eisenhower in 1955 to wake America up, even though other presidents had serious cardiovascular problems. Franklin D. Roosevelt died of a massive stroke at age 63. Calvin Coolidge died of a heart attack at 64. And Bill Clinton, he had a quadruple coronary bypass at 58. But he's still alive because he became vegan and is now 77 years old. If you had a heart attack in the 1950s, that was essentially a death sentence, as people just died and the mortality was 40%, even if you were hospitalized. The doctors just basically stared at you. The life-saving cardiopulmonary resuscitation efforts performed by medical doctors today, they weren't invented until the 1960s. President Eisenhower had the most respected cardiologist in the country, Dr. White. He told the press that the president's damaged heart would recover just the same way as your cuts would recover on your skin, and that the scar would be strong in a couple of weeks. However, scar tissue is never like the original tissue, and if you keep injuring your heart, well, eventually it's going to fail. President Eisenhower had several risks to getting a heart attack. He was a smoker, and then he had an inflammatory bowel disease called Crohn's disease, and had a small bowel obstruction that resulted in surgical resection of the ileum. He also had a large stroke, and he had 7 heart attacks and 14 cardiac arrests, and eventually died at 78 years old. Now, this is not how I want to spend my retirement years. I tried to find what kind of diet Eisenhower ate, but I couldn't find it, except for some reference of a low-fat diet, and a journalist, she blamed his problems on processed refined toast. However, my guess would be that Eisenhower ate more than toast, and that his low-fat diet wasn't a low-fat, whole food vegetarian diet, which is the only diet shown to halt the progression of coronary atherosclerosis. This study was published in 1990, and that showed the benefits of reversing atherosclerosis and an angiogram. And they followed these patients up for another 5 years, and it still confirmed that they could halt the progression of atherosclerosis with this diet. Now, I agree that processed refined carbohydrates are terrible because we eat pounds of it. But if you're only eating 1 teaspoon of sugar with your morning coffee and you're not eating other refined carbohydrates, that's really not a big deal. But people who need to sugar up their coffee, they're probably eating toast, sandwiches, bagels, white rice, desserts, cookies. These all add up. Do you see how refined carbohydrates throughout the day can add up to pounds of inflammation? Today, everyone is blaming sugar, but in the 1960s, everyone blamed fat for our metabolic problems. And really, they both share the spotlight as we are eating both in abundance. And remember, atherosclerosis is an ancient disease before the advent of highly processed refined carbohydrates like simple sugars. Now, unless you count the honeybee as making processed honey. Back in the 1960s, scientists linked diets high in saturated fat to atherosclerosis, and Americans were advised to reduce saturated fat. But I think it's kind of like how my kids listen to me. They only hear part of the words. So everyone translated that to eating less dietary fat, and then no one listened to the advice, and they just basically ate more processed low-fat junk food. So Americans continue to eat the same amount of saturated fat and increase their overall fat intake with added oils, dairy fat, and on top of that, they increased sugar and flour. People got fatter because they simply ate more food. They also ate a ton more chicken, which has at least 18% saturated fat. The message was eat less fat, and people just heard eat more food. In case you didn't know, all extra calories from sugars and proteins, they are all converted into fat by your liver. Saturated fat transported as triglycerides. That's why when you eat a lot of sugar and refined carbohydrates, your triglycerides go up. When they go up, they make your LDL cholesterol go up. And this all contributes to atherosclerosis and heart disease. Now, if you're an athlete burning 5,000 calories a day, eating highly refined carbohydrates, that's not going to be a problem for you because you're going to just burn them faster than you can eat them. But if you're going from a sleeping to a sitting position and then you're driving and then you're eating, you're not burning very many calories, and your high blood sugar, they will be high triglycerides, which will elevate your LDL cholesterol. This is a reflection of overeating, and you either need to move more or you need to reduce your starch and sugars. And in reality, some of you didn't need a blood test to tell you that. When your belly is rounder and your pants are getting tighter and your balance is getting higher, you know you're eating more than your body is burning. However, there are lots of people who don't have these symptoms, and these people look skinny on the outside, but they're actually fat inside. This is a silent epidemic of skinny fat people called TOFI. Thin outside, fat inside. And certain ethnicities, like Asians, classically look healthy on the outside because they look skinny, but they actually have deadly fat inside. Millions of people have TOFI and they don't even know it. And this is why India and China have high diabetes rates, but lower obesity rates, although they are getting more obese. It is not just saturated fat that's a problem, although saturated fat makes metabolites that are toxic to your mitochondria and your muscle, reducing its ability to burn fuel and store sugar, which leads to insulin resistance, the gateway to type 2 diabetes. Many people eat their saturated fat with animal protein, which are a great source of branched-chain amino acids like leucine, important for muscle growth. But the more branched-chain amino acids you eat, the higher your insulin and cholesterol levels. So unless you're actively building muscle like a bodybuilder and working out, relatively sedentary people like me would just get fat and fatty liver if I drank a bunch of protein shakes and ate a bunch of meat. This is because there's one simple rule about protein. You can't store extra protein. Any extra protein that you don't use for the day is toxic and broken down to be stored as saturated fat. You simply can't outrun a bad diet. Even Jim Fixx, the infamous marathon runner who made running a household activity, famously bragged about being skinny and eating whatever he wanted because he could work it off. Sadly, he died of a heart attack at 52 while running. He was, by all accounts, a skinny person. This is why, number 7, you need to get your protein source right. The wrong protein source will not only burn your body with branched-chain amino acids, but they will also be full of saturated fats that together raises your total LDL cholesterol levels, causing atherosclerosis. And this is why I make sure I eat beans as my protein source, like garbanzo beans, because they not only have been shown to reduce cholesterol, but they also reduce blood sugars, they improve insulin sensitivity, and they increase longevity. And that's why hummus is a Mediterranean staple. I often run out of time to cook, and that's why I love canned beans and keep them in stock in my pantry. It's so easy. When I want a snack, I rinse and dry a can of garbanzo beans and pour them into a bowl that is coated with a teaspoon of avocado oil, and I shake them up. Then I pour them over an aluminum-free baking sheet and line it evenly, and I sprinkle a bunch of my favorite spices. I usually prefer turmeric, cumin, onion powder, and white pepper. Now this whole thing goes in a toaster oven for like maybe half an hour at 325 degrees. I just basically want to dry it up, give it a little texture, and I use this on my salad, kind of like a protein-rich crouton, or I just eat it as a snack. Now I know athletes, they look to build muscle, and that's why black beans are so nutritious as well. And that's number 8. They are so convenient. They have the same benefits as garbanzo beans to lower your cholesterol, but they also have more leucine compared to garbanzo beans. I don't want to get too much leucine, but leucine is still an essential amino acid that everybody needs to get from their diet. So getting the right amount is important. And black beans, they also have resistant starch that have been shown to reduce toxigenic gut bacteria, and it increases gut bacteria that produces butyrate, the energy molecule that your colon needs to push cholesterol out. So remember, when you get food poisoning, when you're overly stressed, when you take antibiotics, your gut microbiome will change. And if you eat the right foods, you can nourish it back to health, and they can nourish your body back to health. It only takes 3 days. It's known that if you change your diet in 3 days, your gut microbiome will change. And you may reduce obesogenic bacteria like Firmicutes. Now, since Eisenhower's heart attack, we've made tremendous progress in reducing the death of cardiovascular disease. However, like Eisenhower, we've saved millions of lives, but they are living with heart failure. And if you have heart failure, you most likely will need an infectious disease doctor, as you have 3 times the rate of getting pneumonia. This is why prevention is the key to not needing more doctors like me. And one simple way to do this is number 9. Swap your refined flour bread and pastries to whole grains just like the Roman gladiators who ate a bunch of wheat and barley. Just by switching to whole grains, you can reduce your cholesterol and your risk for diseases. But there's a trick to eating grains that will give you even better benefits, and that is to cook them and then refrigerate them overnight before you reheat them to eat. And this is number 10. And you can do this really with any starchy food to increase resistant starch, which will reduce your blood sugar spikes, which further reduces your triglycerides to reduce your cholesterol. And if you want to understand the science behind how this works, watch the next video.